What? I don't get an introduction? Just kidding.
Okay, I'd be like, I known him for a long time. He's a great guy. That'd probably be it. But I can say that about both of you guys.
My name's James Worm. I'm the Clay County GIS coordinator. I've been at this position for 11 years, actually at the end of this month. So I'm by no means an expert in Pro, but I made the switch a year or so ago, and I'm a sucker and agreed to do this. So here we go. The first thing that I was thinking when I got going on this and working on going through some of these problems of figuring out how to do Pro is maybe it'd be good to make a Pro page on our Slack channel so people could ask questions to people and put it on there. And then I also put my email on the comments, so you guys can write that down if you want. If you have any questions, you can send them to me. I'm sure Dave would be welcome on that as well. Finally, when you're getting going on this, I would definitely recommend reaching out to people using Google, and definitely don't worry about YouTube because that's a great resource. And actually, there's a guy I would recommend at the end of this that you could watch. We're going to try and cover some setup, editing, tips and tricks. When I say tips and tricks, I just mean I'm going to show you some tools that I think might make life easier for you. And my main goal on this, hopefully, is that every person listening will at least learn one new thing today. All right. With that said, we're behind. Let's get going. So first of all, you might be asking yourself, how do you get Pro? So I will bring in my Esri, and just like with ArcMap, if you go to your downloads and gather your data, you can go in and download Pro right here. The difference between Pro and ArcMap, of course, is that you also need to make a user account for your people, which you can do on ArcGIS Online. As you can see, I'm in my organization overview. You can see we have basic, standard, advanced. You can go in here and manage members, and you can access anybody in your network and give them permission to use Pro. So when you access a Pro, then you would use that user information. Just remember, when you're using this, ArcMap was very much you downloaded it and it was on your computer. Pro is supposed to be kind of an interface between computer and online. The first thing you might notice when you look at my screen right now, I have a Pro up, is that I have this dark area around here. The nice feature that I really like to save my eyes is it has a dark mode ability. You can access your settings in two ways. One, you can go out to the project page. This is what it will look like when you open up a Pro account. You can do map, catalog, scene. But if you go over here to, let's see here, we're going to go into options and then go down to general, my bad, and then go to the application theme, and you can pick between light and dark. So if you like to save your eyes like me, the other way you can get to that is you can click on this arrow right here and you get a fast version into all your settings. So there's two ways you can go into it and get to it. Another aspect, if you open up a new Pro, you'll notice it goes pretty quick because this is a 64-bit versus 32. You see I have a bunch of layers that I just kind of made for this project. So I made a map for Brandy. Let's say I don't want that to be in my thing. You can remove the project from the list, and now it is no longer there. This is kind of a nice deal. And if you remember in ArcMap, when you would open up a new ArcMap, you'd get your maps, but maybe you could have deleted them, but it's kind of a similar thing. I just wanted to show you. This will take a little bit. So we're waiting for that. I'll just go back here quick. So just yell at me if I'm going too quick. But one aspect that I liked when I first started was you can go into catalog. Dave's going to go into more on how you get all these tabs over on the side over here, so I'm not going to go too much into that. But when you first open ArcMap, these aren't here. This is kind of similar to when you open things up, they kind of pop over here. But catalog will always be open when you first do it. And you can go into your favorites, and you can actually easily add any favorites. And they've really, in Pro, made it database friendly and getting ArcGIS Online friendly. So you can easily go into a folder or add a database. You can see I've added one of each. So during redistricting, I had all my files in there for easy access, and also my beacon layers are in my Clay Master. Which also reminds me, when you add data, they've made it really nice in Pro that you can go into my contents or my organization online. So it's really easy to add layers. So really think of Pro as a melding of two. So it's really easy to use from both by going into your organization, and then you can also access your PC files as well. Moving on, the custom ribbon up here on the top, you'll see that I have the binoculars and a zoom in rectangle zoom that we had in ArcMap. That does not come up here when you open up Pro. So if you actually click this button right here and customize ribbon, you can actually pick things that you would like to put on there. So if you go down here, you can see you got like zoom to layer. If you want to save whatever you want for quick access to be available up there, you can actually add it to that. Another thing, if you don't program this for zooming, you can simply do a shift and then drag. And that's, oops, I'm sorry. You have to do this, sorry, and then shift and drag. That's a nice thing you're going to learn as you go through Pro, is that you can't have the select if you want certain tools you want to be on this guy, which actually I was going to cover a little later, but I might as well cover it now. So when I first got into Pro, I was in here and I'm like, how do I identify a parcel? See, I'm clicking and nothing's happening. But if you actually just go over to the pan that pans your map, you can actually click and then it will bring up your parcel information. So just be aware, make sure when you want to do commands that you come up here, hit the explore button, which also I wanted to cover as well, is that the great thing about Pro, if you just hover over tools, it will tell you exactly what each tool is. So I'd really recommend always looking, and it'll tell you constantly what you want to know about each tool. I would also recommend when you do come in here into map that you also hit these down arrows, because there's a lot of information that is available on these drop downs. So I'd really investigate a little bit when you first come in here, because there is a lot of information. All right, now I'm going to cover another area. When you bring in a layer, if you hit this corner again and we go in, we can go under options. Well, all right. Map scene, there we go. Sorry, I'm going in from a different way than I have on my directions here. But anyway, if you're going to add a lot of data into your map, there's this nice feature here where you can decide whether or not you want your layers to be visible when you add them. Just a nice little thing if you're going to be dumping a lot of data and maybe you don't want them all to show up to bog down your map, you can click this arrow right here and make it so they don't show up when you first add to your map. Another area for us, when we do our parcels, we do an active database, and that's really easy in this to access. When I did it in ArcMap, I had to go into catalog and then do an OLE database. Here, you can just hit databases, and then you can easily click on your OLE and you can access. So if you're solutions customer and you have the 400, or if you have another active layer so that your changes change right away, this is where you would access that. All right, now I'm going to quick cover in my presentation one. I think this will be really useful to people. One aspect of Pro, before when you used to bring layers in, you could easily use and search your parcel layer, but you'll notice up here in the locate box, and this comes up by hitting the binoculars up here, you'll notice that it's not finding anything. So if you click this options button right here, when you first do Pro, it will have the Esri World Geocoder available. So when you first try to look up a parcel, what you're going to get is you're going to end up going somewhere out of your county. So what you're going to want to do to set that up is click here on the, what is that called? It's called the options button here. Go to provider settings right here. And then you can configure your locate. And you can see I have my parcel poly right here. Hit OK. Now it brings up this. So in the past in ArcMap, when you would, when you would be in here and you would hit your identify tool, it would bring up everything, right? It would have all the layers. In Arc Pro, you have to configure. So let's go back. I'm losing my mouse here. So in here, it picks a layer and puts the contains, but I'm going to show you, I'm going to put a couple other ones really quick in here. So I'm going to do the address, and I always do contains, not equals, because I feel like then you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself to get the record exactly right. Go here to equal. Sorry, I did it wrong. Go to, well, actually, here's a great example. So I try to hit back on this. Esri's like, are you sure you wanted to do equals? Because I don't think you want to do that. So you can hit, nope, you're right, I didn't. Oh, I missed. Well, here's a great example. So I screwed that up. And now you might be thinking, oh no, how am I going to get it back? So when I click this button, I no longer have my parcel poly, but that's not the case. You can go to the pencil and you can re-access and change this from equals to contains. The reason that I did this is now when we go back to our locate and I hit this button, well, first I'm going to turn off this locator. When I hit this, now we'll bring these up. I might be saying, okay, actually I'm going to do this. So remember, I also put my name and my address. So I'm going to try my name to try and find my house. Notice my house showed up, but well, it's not showing the name. Well, if you go over here to this menu button and hit, right now we're on list view. If you go to detail view, now you can access all properties that you have for that property. So it makes it a great way to look up information. And finally, the last thing that I'm going to cover before I hand this over to Dave is symbology. So before, if you recall in ArcMap, to get to symbology, all you had to do was double click on a layer, it would pop up, you got symbology and you're good to go. In Pro, when you want to, so I'm going to turn on this land use layer, and right now it's not symbolized by unique values. So you're going to have to right click, but instead of going to properties like you would have done in ArcMap, you're actually going to go to symbology. Now symbology is going to come up over here like most things in Pro. It comes up over here. Now obviously this is just docked here. You can move it wherever you want to. So you're going to click on this button, do unique values. Now you have the code. Now you might be saying, well, wait a minute, I hit unique values. Where are all my values? Well, you have to hit this plus button right here. And even then, you're not quite done. Then you have to select all the layers, hit OK. Now they're all showing up in here. One last thing, you may recall when we were in ArcMap, that when you got in and went to symbology, you could easily get rid of the all other values by just clicking this button right here. Well, in Pro, it's not that much more difficult, but just a little bit. So here, you can't click here, but if you right click right here, you can actually, oh, here we go. You'd hit remove right here, sorry. The other way you can do it is you can hit more right here and then just uncheck the show all values. And then you won't get the all values button anymore. So I'm a little behind, but I can now pass it on over to Dave for editing. Thanks.
Hey, you're doing great. This is Micah.
Yep.
Does anyone have any questions before Dave begins? Is there anything that, any specific questions for what James just covered? And just a reminder to all of you that have joined us, we are recording this and we'll be sending out a link later because he covered some great stuff. I'm a pretty good user and I just learned a few things. So awesome, James. Okay, take it away, Dave.
All right, can everybody hear me? Hello?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yep. You're good, Dave.
Let me do a share tray here. Okay, are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Yep, basic editing ArcGIS Pro.
Awesome, thank you. So I did a quick little PowerPoint here. We're not going to stick to it strictly. Basically, I have a outline in front of me here that I'm going to kind of go through, and I'll probably run through the PowerPoint kind of quickly, and then I'll go to more of a live pro demo. My name's Dave Kroll. I work for the city of Johnston. I've been doing GIS in a municipal setting for about 15 years. I, like James, am no expert in Pro. In fact, I've just really started switching over heavy to using Pro day to day, probably within the last 6 months. And it's a steady progression. It's kind of like climbing a mountain. You start out and you're not sure how you're going to get to the top, but you have to put one foot in front of the other and keep working, which is one of the reasons I volunteered to do this. I found that if I don't push myself and step out of my comfort zone, I won't progress. And so one of the reasons I volunteered to do this little thing is because I didn't know a lot about editing in Pro. And so this kind of forced my hand a little bit to get more familiar with it. And like Micah, James just taught me something that I wanted to know about symbolizing layers that I've been struggling with. So that's awesome. Thanks, James, for that. Okay, so basic editing within ArcGIS Pro. First thing you need to know, and James kind of touched on it, in the ArcGIS Pro interface, a lot of the stuff is very workflow driven or it's contextual. And when I say contextual, based on what you have clicked on or what you hope to do, it will either enable or disable certain functionality. And so that's kind of hard to get used to because particularly with editing back in ArcMap, you would have to either start an editing session and then you could very discreetly know exactly what you were editing, which layers were live for editing and so on and so forth. With Pro, it's a lot more fluid, and that's both good and bad. Bad if you're a former ArcMap user and want to be very discreet about what you edit and make sure that you don't screw something up, but good in that it makes the workflow easier, especially if you're doing repeated edits in the same fashion. So I'm going to fly through this PowerPoint a little bit quickly, and hopefully we'll touch back on the stuff actually in the ArcGIS Pro application. So one of the things that we're going to cover is a little bit about settings for an editing environment. And so they've increased some functionality, which I think is a great thing. In your settings, you can tweak and things to more suit your workflows. And we'll go through each of these tabs in Pro itself. The other thing is we're going to talk a little bit about how editing is laid out in the ribbons across the top. And then also there are some icons along the bottom of your screen in Pro that we'll touch on. And some of them kind of duplicate the same features, if you will, for editing, and some are a little bit different, but we'll talk about both of them. Also, if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about active templates, what they are, why you might want to use them, and why you might not want to use them. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about like group templates. Again, you might participate in some workflows that could take advantage of using these group templates. Oh, and then if I have time, I'm going to get into some of this, but I guess it's a good time now to talk a little bit. One of the things I like to do with my ArcGIS Pro projects, and actually I even did this in ArcMap a lot, was set up a sandbox geodatabase, I call it. which is basically kind of like a scratch layer that you can dilly-dally in and do things. And so you'll see when I switch over to Pro, that's exactly what I've done for this presentation, except not only do I do this when I'm giving a presentation like this, I do this in my actual ArcMap document or my ArcGIS Pro project. Now, ArcGIS Pro will set up a geodatabase that's specific to that project, to store like layers and features that you might generate using geoprocessing tools. But I don't like to use that because that's stored within a folder inside of that project. What I like to do is have a scratch geodatabase on my C drive of my machine, so that I can always access that, and I can have kind of a scratch workspace. And inside that geodatabase, I set up a feature data set for lines, points, and polygons, so that if I just want to try something or do something that might get erased later, I can just quickly go to that and know exactly where it's at in each of my Pro projects. That way it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to a specific project that I'm working on. Okay, I'm going to pop out and share my other screen here. Oh, wait a minute, what's going on here? Okay, it's sharing my Pro really slowly. I might have got too much in a hurry. Give me a second. Okay, are you seeing my Pro screen?
We are.
Okay, awesome. So going back to what I was just talking about, one of the things I do is I set up a scratch geodatabase. Here I called it CGIS Sandbox Geodatabase. And inside that geodatabase, if I went to catalog view, you'd see I basically set up some different layers so that I can, play. And so that works really well for this presentation today. But one of the things I found when I was learning Pro is I need to set aside a certain amount of time once a week, whether it's half an hour or an hour, and usually it's on Fridays, to learn something new. So whether it be trying out something that you saw in James's presentation or my presentation, or maybe it's just acquainting yourself with one more icon or tool that you find when you're doing simple editing. So real quick, I'm going to pop out into projects here and go through some of these settings. So if you go down to projects and then options, and you switch from current settings to editing, this is where your settings for your editing environment are shown. If you start with the general tab, you look under some attributes. I'm going to actually pop back. I'm going to start with the session tab. One of the things that I really like about this is it gives you some flexibility. One of the new things is that if you remember right, in ArcMap, you'd have to start an editing session and you'd have to end an editing session. And I mean, I had it happen to me in our old building. Our transformer was bad and we lost power a couple times, and I was right in the middle of some, editing operations. And so, there's a potential to lose some work. So right away, if you check this box, you can automatically opt to save edits either based on a specific time interval or maybe a number of operations that you're doing. So say you're doing a bunch of production editing where you're drawing, building features in a map, you might, set this a lot lower. So one thing that I find useful is to set your threshold. It's just basically how much work are you willing to lose? So if you're editing buildings, are you willing to lose the last 2 buildings or the last hour's worth of work? So you can also set it to a time interval in minutes based on what you want to do. So that's that toggle. The other thing is too, if you remember, like I already mentioned, in ArcMap, you'd start and end your editing session, which was kind of nice because you had finite control. You knew when you were editing and you knew when you weren't. In ArcGIS Pro, it's pseudo live editing all the time. Well, if you're still transitioning from ArcMap to Arc Pro and you want a more similar editing experience to the way it was in ArcMap, you can check this box here, and then it will enable a tool on the editing toolbar that will allow you to explicitly start and end your edit sessions more similar to the way you're used to experiencing in ArcMap. this has been particularly useful for me as I've started to transition from ArcMap to ArcPro. Okay, so there's some other options here. Saving edits when saving project, that's kind of self-explanatory. I go ahead and leave the dummy screens on, as my friend's grandpa used to call them, the dummy lights or the dummy screens. I leave them on because that way, even though sometimes it gets annoying, when I'm transitioning from using ArcMap to learning Pro, I would rather have it throw me a bunch of roadblocks and then have to manually think through the process until I get those neural pathways in my brain paved in stone. I want the option to be able to do that. I'm looking at anything else here that's really important. Okay, going back to the general tab, this is really cool. You know, you can enforce attribute validation when you save edits. This is kind of handy to keep your data clean so you're not making mistakes. This one I do normally have checked because I have a lot of like my pipes and stuff in my sewer and storm sewer network set up with some validation and subtyping. And so a lot of times, depending on how I do something, I'll use this to alert me to the fact that, hey, I'm changing this from like a subdrain to a main. So here again, talking about uncommitted attribute edits, if you have this checked, it will always prompt you. If you don't, if you want it a different way, as you get more comfortable editing in Pro, you might choose to disable some of these functionalities, some of these dummy lights, as I call them. What else? The other stuff has to do with geometry, all kinds of good stuff in here. One of the things that I did in preparation for this presentation was to sit here and literally like go through these options one by one and toggle them on and off and then see how it affected my editing environment when I was actually making edits. So that would be a good use of your time if you do dedicate some time once a week to play with new things or new features. You know, just sit down and just take time and go through each one of these options so you can understand. One of the biggest failures I think I made when I was using ArcMap is I honestly think I probably only used about 7 to 10% of the capabilities of the software in my last 15 years here at Johnston. And so one of the things that I found when I started moving to Pro, it's just like, oh, hey, that's really cool. I can do that now. And so what I'm trying to do is not wait another 15 years before I discover how to do that, or not only to know that it's available, but also know how to use it to my advantage in my day-to-day working environment. Okay, so this is some cool stuff. We're not going to get into this because I consider it a little bit more advanced editing stuff, but you can do all kinds of really cool stuff with annotation and editing. And so here's the settings where you find to, you know, automate some of this stuff and allow you to do certain things. I will briefly touch upon this. Sometimes when editing lines, one of the things that I've discovered that I really like about Pro is that it's easier to put in a line by distance direction, you know, in more, in my mind, more familiar ways as a surveyor would do it. My background, I was a civil engineer on the private side for a while. And so a lot of times I'd be writing legal descriptions or, you know, drawing them. And then you'd always have to label your line with the surveyor's bearing and distance. And it's always kind of pained me to no end growing up in a more CAD environment, whether it be MicroStation or AutoCAD, that how hard it was in ArcGIS to do any kind of labeling and or inputting of data based on distance and direction. So with Pro, all that has really improved quite a bit, and I'm really digging that. Okay, lastly, you've got this symbology tab, which allows you to, when you're editing like a polygon, you can change the colors based on this stuff. And now's a good time to note for me. I noticed, you know, James showed you some customizations like switching into dark mode or whatever. And I tend not to do a lot of that. And my reasoning is this. I work with a small group of people here, and I'm primarily responsible for teaching others in my department how to use GIS and when to use GIS. And if I go into their office and I find that they have like some funky mouse and I'm expected to help them. It's a lot harder if you customize your interface and then you open somebody else's Arc Pro session. It'll be like Greek to you because you have the ability to customize it to the nth degree. But if somebody else is going to help you and they try and step into your shoes and do something, it makes it almost impossible to do. So I like to keep things fairly stock in my setup of ArcGIS Pro. That way too, if you happen to lose something and have to reinstall, you also don't lose all your customizations that you had made and have to figure out how to get back to 0.0. Getting back to the task at hand, there's all kinds of, you can change properties of colors, the vertices. You know, maybe you're a person, middle-aged male that's colorblind. You can change these colors so you can see them better on the screen. That's a nice thing to do there. Okay, looking at my outline here, I'm going to pop back. Okay, let's just look at the ArcGIS Pro interface here and look at some of the general user interface. So one thing that you guys will know, and James kind of touched upon it, is ArcGIS Pro is very context sensitive. So depending on what you're trying to do and what you have clicked and activated, you can or can't do certain things. And so that's really good if you're a beginning user, but it's a lot harder for some of us that have been using ArcMap for years and come in here and you're like, I know how to do this. Why won't it do what I want it to do? And I saw James get tripped up earlier. Same thing. It's just, if you don't have the right button, tab, or interface active, you may not be able to see what you want to do next. So just to point out some things, editing, you can see right now, the highlighted tab is the map tab. If I come over and context sensual, if I tap on left click on the edit tab, then immediately I see all these different tools that are opened up. And so first, obviously is the snapping tool. Notice when I click on this and I hover over this, this little tile or pane actually is split into two parts. So there again, you have to be very careful about what you think you're clicking on, that it's all one button or multiple buttons or multiple options, as well as these little icons. If you hover over those, like James said, it's a really cool thing that you can at least get some context sensitive basing instructions, or if you don't know what you're doing. But when I talk about being contextual in nature, everything in Pro is contextual in nature. So you have to pay attention, like down here in your data source, you have to pay attention to if a layer is highlighted like that, or if it's not highlighted, or if your map. So you really have to, at least when you're learning, you really have to pay attention to what's highlighted and where, so that you don't get tripped up too easily. So let's go across some of these other tabs across the top. Obviously, the first one is start out with your snapping. This is traditional to like ArcMap. One thing that you note, and this screwed me up multiple times, is that it simply isn't checked at all. So when it's highlighted that it's dark blue, that means that snapping is active, it's on. If it's clear like that, it's off. Even yesterday when I was getting ready for this, I couldn't figure out why I wasn't getting snapping on, and I come and look up here and it wasn't even highlighted. I'd been doing a bunch of messing around and I inadvertently had shut it off somehow. Okay, let's look some more. Okay, create features. So this is just like when you used to start your editing session in ArcMap, you would used to have to, right click, edit, start edits on the layer that you're interested in editing it on, right? Well, now you don't have to do that. You basically just have to have your editing, whatever you're going to edit, highlighted over here. You hit create, and what that does is bring up what I described earlier as like an editing template. And so what it usually does is it pulls any of the layers that are editable in your table of contents over in here, and usually there's a generic template set up for that, right? So in this case, if I wanted to edit new buildings, I could simply highlight it and start putting in a new building. But keep in mind right now, and this, notice how this hid when I started doing stuff to give me screen real estate, it went away. I can just click on it to bring it back. Whereas in ArcMap, I would have to physically stop editing on new buildings, especially if this was in a different geodatabase, and start editing in my line features, everything is live, meaning I can edit in any one of these geodatabases, even if they're in separate locations on separate drives. So now I'm going to switch and edit a line just, without stopping. I didn't have to stop, save edits or anything, right? Well, this is good and bad because I just made 2 different edits in 2 different geodatabases, and but have I committed my edits? No, I haven't. So you can come up here and use this save bar that is only active, when I'm editing, and save. And then again, I get the dummy lights that say, hey, do you really want to do this? Yeah. I'm going to cancel out of that. One of the other things I like and I find really handy is, like, say this line was an error. So I could undo, right, which is pretty cool. Or, like, let's say, one of my favorites is just hit the escape key, or just delete. I can delete right away. That helps. Let's see, where am I at here? Sorry, I got a little ahead of myself, got off topic. Okay, so again, going back to templates, delete lines, one of the cool things about templates is you can set them up and customize them. I didn't do a lot of customization here, but literally I just renamed this the stock template that pops up when I'm editing. I just went in and renamed it. You can adjust these tools if you want to see certain tools. Like, say you're in a production workflow where all you do is digitize buildings. You can put your top 3 tools just in that short bar. If those are the ones that your go-to tools used all the time, you can just do that there. The other thing is you can name multiple templates. You can, just like an ArcMap, I was so ecstatic when they came out with the templates in ArcMap, the editing templates, where you could change certain attributes so that when you started a new feature, it would automatically pre-populate, different attributes and stuff. That to me was a huge time saver. And so you can still do that here. And in fact, they've upped the ante a little bit. You can actually do what they call a group template. So if you're in a production workflow where you're editing, and I guess the classic Esri example is, like, say you work for an electric utility and you're plopping telephone poles along a right of way. If and you have your databases set up so that certain validation rules, like there has to be so many conductor lines that come to each transformer, or for every telephone pole you put in your map, you want to add 2 transformers. You can actually set that up so you can literally drop multiple features at the same time every time you edit, which is kind of handy. It doesn't work for me. I don't really have a bunch of workflows that I have to do that, but it's kind of nice to know that you can do that. And it's all about expediting the editing experience there. Okay, so one of the other things I was going to talk about briefly is that kind of covers some of and then of course the top toolbar, there's other things that are kind of standard, like modify, delete records. But there's also these down here at the bottom, there's these other icons. And again, this is another way to access your snapping. Again, I can come up here, I can toggle it on. Down here, if I hover, it'll tell you what's going on. Gives you a brief synopsis of what snaps I have enabled. It tells you which ones are enabled. But so this is kind of a repeat of this if you expand this tool, but it's kind of nice to have it right here on the screen. If you know where it's at, you can jump down there and check your snapping constraints. Let me go here. So constraints. These are quick toggles for like if you want to do like an orthogonal line, or if you've got some special stuff that you want to do, you can quickly access that right there. This is the one that in the past I've never used, but I think I'm going to start using this a lot more now that I started in preparation for this presentation. I started looking at this and I'm kind of getting excited about this. So one of the things you can do is you can toggle on a grid, and you can set the grid. This is very dense, but you can set the grids. Hold on, I'm losing my. Why can't I see it? Okay, you can click on these grid settings, and you can change the intervals, the major and minor stuff. You can see at what scale, you know, it comes on. It's kind of handy. You can snap to that grid. The other really cool thing about that is you can actually rotate that grid based on, sorry, you can rotate that grid based on your needs. So if you're drawing a building and you want to hold one side of that building parallel, you can turn that grid. And you can turn that grid, not, you know, in ArcMap, you probably would have to type in, well, that's exactly 1.3 degrees, you know, and that always drove me crazy. But one of the cool things they've done is that you can snap and you can literally snap and then tweak this grid based on just rotating it to make the grid temporarily just for one operation. You can tweak it to off 90-degree axis, and then like you could align the grid with the side of the building, and then you could draw these grids in. So if you have like an aerial photo, the example is to line that up with the side of the building in an aerial photo. That's kind of cool. The other big thing that I'm excited about is this this ground to grid option. So one of the things that I always struggle with moving to ArcMap from more of an engineering technician position is that in AutoCAD and MicroStation, it seems so much easier to draw a line by bearing and distance or direction, either from a call out and a legal description, a meets and bounds description, or whatever. And Esri has done a good job about kind of getting a lot closer to where I think they should have been about 10 years ago. And that's when they actually, let's do some editing here. So if I'm just going to do a simple line, whoops, that is not what I wanted. So there again, everything's context sensual. So I had selected, I didn't have a line selected. So here it's going to automatically show me that angle from pseudo due north. But what I like is if in the middle of this tool, before I left click to end that line, you know, you can do direction and distance. But this to me is actually the game changer. Right here, you can change if you know that you've got a surveyor's bearing, you know, minutes, degrees, minutes, seconds, or if you want to go by quadrant or, you know, north azimuth, you can do that. And then you can set your distance here, you know, on the fly, 200 feet, hit enter, boom, there's your line at that angle and direction. And I don't know, it's just the little things that seem to make life a little more easier. The other thing you can do is you can set your feature classes up with fields that will store that bearing and direction. So then you can quickly generate labels and annotation from that. So if you do a lot of work, I don't personally do a lot of work with legal descriptions anymore, but to have a bearing and distance to automatically label a line, that to me is kind of a cat's meow. So I like that. Okay, I kind of covered active templates and group templates a little bit. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty, but you literally have to just sit here and make a scratch geodatabase and some feature classes and start playing with, you know, doing your old workflows in Pro and as you used to do them, and then figure out what tools you want to use. But the biggest thing that has screwed me up in the past has been just this whole notion of context sensitive things. So you really have to be aware at all times what is highlighted in your table of contents, what tools are active, is your snapping active, is it not active? One of the other things is kind of neat, you know, in your old table of contents, you would kind of have the layer order of things. And now you have your geodatabases. You've got your old school selection. How many times in the past have you guys in ArcMap like either A, turned off a layer so that you wouldn't mistakenly edit in it so that you couldn't? One of the things I like now too is you get this pencil. You just throw this pencil on here. And right now this is telling me, hey, these are the available layers to edit, but this one is not because it's a base map kind of thing, so you can't edit in that. But then it also tells you these messages like, hey, by the way, back in ArcMap when you used to get that message about something being not projected or whatever, this map isn't natively projected, or this layer isn't natively projected in the projection you're working in or whatever. So this is kind of cool, but you toggle these off, and then even though editing is active and live, you're not going to be editing in new buildings now. So that's kind of handy too. Kind of digging that. I think that is most of what I had. I don't know, does anybody have any questions for me right now?
If someone does have a question and they are not comfortable speaking up to this group, you can always put it in the chat window. And Dave, I gotta say, you've been the cat's meow, you've dilly-dallied, you're making me smile this afternoon.
Well, let me tell you what. I have grown so much throughout this process because if you remember, I presented a month ago and I was really struggling with switching over to Pro. And just the fact that I was going to have to present today, I'm a procrastinator by nature. And I really didn't start preparing for this until about 3 days ago. And James was great about poking me and nudging me to get things together. But really what it boils down to is you have to spend time in the application, clicking, screwing up, fixing it, doing it again, so that you pave those neural pathways in your brain that, hey, this is how I used to do it in ArcMap. This is how I do it in Pro. But what I am telling you is that in the last, let's say 2 months of me using ArcGIS Pro, I'm finding a lot more reasons to not ever go back to ArcMap, which is something that I never thought I would say. So that's the good news.
I was waiting for the bad news. No bad news?
No bad news. It's all good.
Fine. Does anyone have any questions for Dave? I will reiterate my journey to ArcMap a couple years ago, or Pro. I also had to make myself do it, and I did it with editing 911 data. And those of you that have done that know how repetitive that kind of editing is. So I forced myself to do it just in Pro, and that was a really good experience on some basic point lines editing to make me learn those new workflows. All right.
Do you have time for me to jump on quick to do a couple things, or are we getting out of time here?
Nope. I say we got,
James, why don't you jump back in there? I'm going to answer questions. Can multiple people edit at the same time? Yes, but only if your geodatabase is set up that way. So you might want to be running like a versioned workflow where you're in an enterprise system. And that way it allows the geodatabase to keep track of who's editing when and who was first and who was second and all that good stuff. But that's a whole nother webinar.
If you're just working in file geodatabases, that does not change. If someone else is editing that file geodatabase, it is locked, and it is not an option to edit it in Pro either.
Yeah, and then I also see Greg chimed in here. Good point, Greg. ArcGIS Online layers can support multiple editors, so that's because they behave like an enterprise geodatabase.
Oh, it's not letting me connect back, so I don't know.
Uh-oh. Josh, help.
It says he's presenter, so currently right now, so.
You blocking that pop-up again? Oh, there you are. You're gone.
Well, can you see my screen now?
Yep.
I just wanted to show two really quick things. I had a lot more, but I think these are the two most useful. So if you remember back in ArcMap when we used to do the calculate field, and you'd have to do it out of an editing session, and if you did that, there was no way to undo it. Well, in Esri now, right now it's off, but you can enable undo. So if you put something in here and it's wrong, if this is selected to enable undo, then you can undo anything that you've done in your table. So just be aware of that. The factory setting is on. So when you're doing anything in here, make sure you click this, and then you'll be able to undo it. And then I just wanted to show one other tool that I found when I was researching this that I thought was really, really cool. So I'm just going to take this move tool, and you would never do this in real life, but I'm going to move this. So let's just say you have a really big polygon in your land use and it gets moved and someone saves and you can't undo it. You can go in. So right now I got this modified features from up here in the edit tool. You can go and hit modify, and this brings up all of your editing tools. So if you look right here under alignment, they have an alignment feature. And so I am simply going to click this that follows it. And so I know the green's right. So if I just see if I can get it to follow along the, oops, doesn't want to listen to me. Maybe if I zoom in a little bit, it'll do it here. It wants to go along the other one. Come on. Well, anyway, if I go to here, and then see if I can get it to keep going here. When I practiced this, it worked perfectly, but of course now it's, if you can follow it along and close it, and of course I missed now. You can hit this, finish it. Of course now it's not working because I didn't get it right. Well, anyway, when I practiced this, and if you can actually, this is why live never works, but if you can, I'll just try and do a little piece of it. The main goal here is if you do get it, and then it should, well, if it moved right. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't put my tolerance on. There we go. So it makes this tolerance here, and then if you hit it, align, it will fix your, and of course, because I can't get the whole thing to go, I'm trying too hard here. I'm going to get this.
Hey, James, I actually found this tool. We haven't talked about this, but I found this tool too, and I found that terribly useful because I can't tell you the number of times I have moved our zoning layer over inadvertently by just a hot second. And so this is really useful.
So it fixed it. But so the main thing when you're doing this, you have to remember this tolerance. So when you finish the tool, you need to put, what it does is it makes a buffer around it. And by doing that, so I'll just show you that one more time. It's really important to make sure this buffer hits both of your features. And if you take the time to do it right, it really does save you. It's just because I'm trying to go quickly, I did it bad. But anyway, if you get this buffer right here to cover the whole thing, I exaggerated it. It doesn't need to be 100, but it will fix it and it will save you a lot of time, especially if you've saved over something. And it will go back. And like I said, I've done this like 4 times practicing, it worked fine, but because I'm doing it live, of course, it's not going to work right. But anyway, those are the 2 main things that I found that were really helpful to me, and there's others, but we didn't get to them today.
Awesome. Well, we have a couple minutes left, so any last chance for questions? This will be recorded, or has been recorded, and we will be sending out a link. And I would definitely see many more ArcGIS Pro topical lunch and learns in the near future. So I encourage everyone who, if there's a bunch of how-tos that you would like to see, to email me or email someone on the IGIC board and they'll get it to me. This is Micah Cutler. Topics can be that are coming to mind. I think I'd like to see one on layouts, especially dealing with legends. I know that's been really tricky for a lot of people. Very specific editing issues, incorporating ArcGIS Online. There's quite a variety. We could deal with some analysis or even doing something with some scripting, arcade expressions, just for getting labeling correct. I think labeling and annotation could definitely be a session on its own. So there's no shortage of topics, I'm sure. So with that, I want to say thank everyone for joining this Lunch and Learn session, and really appreciate your guys' audience. Thank you, James, and thank you, Dave, for doing live demos and for getting the ball rolling on editing. You guys did a fantastic job.
Thanks.
Really well done. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Penny. Thanks all.